Hello everyone, and welcome to Walton, or better known Helton Academy. This is Mr. Keating's class. We will be going over poetry today. I am his teaching assistant, Carolyn. Hello everybody, and welcome back to my channel. So if you are like me, and you are absolutely in love with the movie Dead Poets Society, then this video is perfect for you because this is Mr. Keating's beginner's guide to reading and loving poetry. So I love doing beginner's guide videos or different videos on specific topics of getting into and enjoying different forms of literature. I have one on classic literature in general, Russian literature. I have one on Shakespeare from a while ago, and I really love doing these kinds of videos. And so I was making a video all about a beginner's guide to reading and enjoying poetry, and sort of taking away the confines that we associate with poetry. And when I was compiling my list of tips, I kept referring back to quotes from Dead Poets Society from the main character, who is a fantastic, very unconventional and inspiring teacher, Mr. Keating. And if you have not watched Dead Poets Society, I cannot recommend you watch it enough. It is the movie that made me fall in love with poetry. It's the movie that made me fall in love with Walt Whitman specifically. And I actually have Uncle Walt behind me here. I'm sitting at my desk, which I will stand upon to change my perspective. It was kind of my beginner's guide mixing and molding with what I've learned from Mr. Keating. Mr. Keating is such an inspiring character, and what he does for his students is incredible. So to set the scene a little bit, we have this all-boys, very conventional school where they want them to learn a very specific way. They want them to learn very specific things. They don't want them to think for themselves. They don't want them to... They really suppress a lot of their emotions, a lot of their learning and their thinking. And there's this amazing English teacher who is introducing them to poetry, and he basically throws all of that to the wind and is very unconventional and teaches them in a way that's interactive and emotive and gets them to really live with the poetry and not just read the poetry and try to decipher what the author is saying. He wants more from that, and that's what I loved so much. So today I'm going to be going over some quotes from Dead Poets Society and hopefully make you want to dive in deeper to poetry, because that's what Dead Poets Society and Mr. Keating did for me, and hopefully I can do that for you with this video and hopefully get you to fall in love with reading some Walt Whitman, because that's probably the best thing that has come out of my love of Dead Poets Society. So anyway, let's begin with these quotes and Mr. Keating's beginner's guide to reading and loving poetry. So Mr. Keating starts his class with whistling that sound, which is why I started the video, the do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And he tells them to come outside, and he basically has this incredible monologue where he talks about the boys that came before them and what you do with your time, and I'm going to get to that a little bit as well. But then they come back into the classroom, and he tells them to open up their books that are 5 centuries of verse. Open it to the introduction and read the introduction. And the introduction is from this PhD professor, What Makes a Poem Great, and so it's the Pritchard scale, and so he writes it on the board, and it's this very unfeeling way to decipher poetry. It's analyzing the rhyme and meter and structure and the author's intent and all of these things that Mr. Keating wants them to forget about and not think about, because that doesn't leave room for you to think for yourself. So there's this incredible quote where he tells them to open up their books to the introduction. They read the introduction, and he tells them to rip out the introduction, and then to savor words and language. And we shouldn't put them against this scale. We should look at them in a more free way, and that words and ideas can change the world. And then there's another incredible quote that I love so much, and that is, "We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race. and the human race is filled with passion. And medicine, law, business, engineering, these are all noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for. To quote from Whitman, "O me, O life, of the questions of these recurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish, what good amid these, O me, O life? Answer, that you are here, that life exists, and identity, that the powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse. That the powerful play goes on and you may contribute a verse." And he asks them, "What will your verse be?" And that is what made me fall in love with Walt Whitman. Hearing that quote, him asking his students that question, because when you're watching the film, you of course put yourself like you are another student in the classroom. And so you think, what will my verse be? And for me, I've always wanted to be an illustrator and a writer, and I thought, my verses will be my prose and my illustrations and my storytelling. That's going to be the verse that I want to leave behind when I'm no longer here. And there's of course the very common Latin phrase carpe diem that is associated with Dead Poets Society: seize the day, make your lives extraordinary. And another quote that he says is, "Gather ye rosebuds while ye may." Why does the writer use these lines? The answer that he gives them is because we are food for worms, lads. Because one day we will not wake up and we will fertilize the flowers that grow above us. And so we have to gather those rosebuds while we can, while we're alive. And we have to seize the day, seize the days that we have. And what I love is that he's using these quotes, he's using poetry to inspire in their own lives. And I think that that's what is taken away a lot in academia, because we are given poetry and we are trying to manipulate our minds to understand what the author is trying to say. We manipulate our own thoughts to understand their lives, but really what Mr. Keating's asking them to do is take these words and configure them in a way that relates to you and that affects your life. How can you take that quote, "Gather ye rosebuds while ye may," and relate it to your own perspective, and inspiring them to seize the day and make your lives extraordinary, and don't just go about life in this very confined way with all these rules and these systems that are given to them and that are enforced on them in this very conventional school setting of Welton or Hilton Academy. And I think that it's so beautiful to take the words and to learn from them and not try to overanalyze them. Another quote from Walt Whitman that is also another reason why I fell in love with Walt Whitman, and that Mr. Keating quotes to one of our main characters, Todd, who I love Todd so much. Also, if you love Dead Poets Society, let me know who your favorite character is or which one you relate most to. I relate most probably to Todd. But the quote is, "I sound my barbaric YAWP over the rooftops of the world." And he's telling Todd specifically, but all of them, to make your voice heard. And in this scene, he asks Todd to say the first things that come to his mind associated with Walt Whitman. How would you describe Walt Whitman? And Todd says, "A sweaty-toothed madman." And that's kind of what I loved about that scene, and what I love about Walt Whitman is he was such an incredible person, and he was so inspiring. And his poems of "Sound your barbaric YAWP over the rooftops of the world, and let your voice be heard, and it's okay to be a crazy sweaty-toothed madman, and to just break out of your shell, break out of yourself." And that's really this incredibly powerful scene of Todd, who is a very shy, timid, subdued, kind of lets people walk all over him and doesn't let his voice be heard. But Mr. Keating is using Walt Whitman, is using poetry to help Todd break out of his shell. And I think the main point, I guess, of what Mr. Keating does is he takes poetry and relates it to their lives. He doesn't take the poetry and say, okay, let's discuss the rhyme and meter and rhythm and what exactly the poem and the structure is. He's going deeper than that, and he's looking at the meaning and what that meaning does to the reader. And I love that. One of my very, very favorite quotes from Dead Poets Society is, "Don't just consider what the author thinks, consider what you think. You must strive to find your own voice." And so I think in academia we are always taught to, if there's a difficult poem, we have to try to understand it, and we'll reread it and reread it and reread it and try to manipulate it in such a way that takes away the effect of it. And if an author is writing a poem that is difficult to decipher, think about, maybe they didn't want me to understand exactly what they're trying to say. Maybe they want me to think for myself. And so that's what Mr. Keating is telling them. Don't just consider what the author is saying. Consider what you have to say about what they're saying. Consider what you think. And when I was doing all of my poetry courses in college, because I did get my minor in writing and I took a bunch of poetry courses, I was always trying to force myself to understand what the author was saying. Okay, what did they mean by that? And I would spend like 10 minutes on 2 lines trying to figure out the meaning because I found it so difficult, when all I had to do was read it and think, how does that make me feel? And how can I relate to that line? Even if it doesn't match exactly what the author's intention was, that's the beauty of art, is it's up for interpretation. And not all writers do want you to understand exactly what they're saying. If they do, they will most likely say it to you rather plainly. And I think that that's when you can relate to the author, because they want you to understand. They don't want you to spend 10 minutes going, what are they saying? They will want you to read their work and go, ah, yes, that's how I feel. I understand you. I see what you're trying to say. And you can share a thought. While more difficult poetry can be a means of reflection and changing perspective of reader and writer and thinking, oh, okay, I don't know what they're exactly trying to say, but I know what that makes me feel, and I know what I'm thinking in relation to that poem. And abstract art is a perfect example of this. A lot of abstract art has these incredible deep meanings. It may just be a black square on a canvas, and that's all you may see. But to the artist, that black square symbolizes so much. But they're not telling you, unless they title it exactly what the black square is symbolizing. They might not want you to know. They might want you to think, what does it symbolize for you? It depends on who is looking at the piece of art, and abstract art is abstract for a reason. They don't want you to know exactly what it is. They want you to feel more than think. And I think that that's a lot of what poetry is, and what more difficult, I guess, poetry is to not just understand exactly the meaning, but to think about it in a way that it's less thinking and more feeling, if that makes sense. Another amazing quote from Mr. Keating is when the head teacher is reprimanding him for his unconventional teaching style, and he's basically saying, if you keep teaching this way, then the boys will think that they can conquer anything, and you're just going to set them up for failure, and basically to do not teach the way you're teaching, and to teach the way we tell you to teach. And he always says that I thought the idea of education was to learn to think for yourself. And that's one of my favorite lines, because in education, there are those professors or those teachers or those people that believe that way, that education is meant to help you think for yourself. Others think that education is meant for you to learn exactly what you are being taught and to understand other people's thoughts and to not really think for yourself. But that's exactly what Mr. Keating is doing. He's using poetry and he's using written language, the most beautiful form of written language, to let his students think for themselves for the first time, because they have grown up in these very restrictive either families or school settings or society in general. It's the first person that really shows them you can think for yourself, and that's what poetry can do, is it can not only, you can not only appreciate poetry, but it can change your life. And that's exactly, like I said in the beginning, of Mr. Keating tells them words and ideas can change the world, and they can also change the reader, and they can change the writer, and they can change you. They can change the world. Another one of my very favorite scenes is when he introduces the topic of Shakespeare and Shakespeare plays, and all of the students go, "Ugh, Shakespeare, oh my god, no." Because in academia, Shakespeare is very, I feel like it's done in a way that needs to be changed, if you want my honest opinion. I think that the way that Mr. Keating approaches Shakespeare is brilliant to a modern audience. Yes, it's important to look at it historically and think, okay, I understand why we are taught it the way we are taught it, but what about teaching it to a modern audience in a way that they can appreciate it more? So what Mr. Keating does, he tells them, "Now many of you have seen Shakespeare done very much like this." And he says in a nasal voice, "O Titus, bring your friend hither." And then he acts out the scene from Shakespeare in different actors' voices. So he does one of John Wayne, who is of course in all those Western movies, those Western films. And then he does another one that's like Marlon Brando. And that makes the students laugh and that makes them enjoy the words, because Shakespeare was such a comedic writer. He had a subgenre in his works of comedies. And I think, from my own experience, Shakespeare in academia is taught in a very serious way. He had so many innuendos and dirty jokes, and he was hilarious. And there are moments of silliness and also enjoyment. And I don't know if Shakespeare's intent was for all these kids in the future to be in these school settings and going over all of his plays in a very mundane way. And I just can't see that. And I hope that there are more teachers in the world like Mr. Keating that approach Shakespeare in a way that's fun and exciting for a modern audience. And I actually did, about a year ago, a whole video about reading and enjoying Shakespeare and reading Shakespeare for fun, and how to read Shakespeare outside of a school setting. And it's kind of a beginner's guide, but also a way to look at Shakespeare in a more fun, enjoyable way as a reader. That's a bit old, but all of the tips that I give and everything that I say in that video still stands today. I still implement everything that I do in that video when I read Shakespeare now. It's a way to, one, understand Shakespeare, understand what he's saying, and to get something out of his plays, but to also enjoy it. And in Dead Poets Society, one of the main characters, Neil, is so inspired by Mr. Keating's teaching. He goes out and auditions for Puck, which is one of the main characters in A Midsummer Night's Dream. It's the play that's being put on at the local public school that's right near this all-boys academy. And so he, not with his father's permission, auditions for this role, and it completely changes his perspective in his life and all of the lives of the other students and Neil's friends. And it's what that teaching style did for Neil. If he wasn't taught that way, the Mr. Keating way, would he have auditioned for Puck? Would he have wanted to become an actor? And he, in that role, made me want to read A Midsummer Night's Dream. Watching him perform in it, watching Mr. Keating's teaching style of Shakespeare was the turning point for me of maybe, like, I want to read Shakespeare now. And that's, I think, what we're missing in a lot of school systems and school settings, is that desire to, it's being introduced to me in a way that I want to do it on my own time. And I think that that is very rare. That's what I love about Dead Poets Society, is it made me fall in love with Walt Whitman especially, and Shakespeare. A Midsummer Night's Dream now is my favorite Shakespeare play, my favorite comedy especially, and I wouldn't have read it without watching Dead Poets Society and without Mr. Keating. So that's kind of what I'm hoping for you today, is hearing my experience with watching the film and how it affected me, and also these incredible quotes that are in the film. And hopefully if you haven't watched it, now you will want to watch it, and it will have a positive effect on you as well and get us to be inspired to read more. And what I love about my channel and my videos and your comments is so many of you tell me that I inspire you to read classics and Russian literature and all of the books that I talk about. And that's just the greatest thing ever, because I think the book community on YouTube and just social media in general is that inspiration. It is what I think a lot of us lacked in school, because we're forced to look at texts in a specific way. And when you just see someone else's enjoyment and how it affects their life, it will make you want to have a similar feeling and to understand what they're going through and want to experience that emotion themselves. So when you see someone fall in love with a book, and it's that thought of when you love someone, you love listening to what they love. And that's, I think, the essence of being a reader and being inspired to read more, is when you see someone else loving something, you want to understand that love. And so it'll make you go out and strive for that yourself and hopefully lead you to other things. Now it's time for another one of the best scenes. The whole film is the best scene. Like, from beginning to end, it's just the best. But another one of my favorites, there are many, is when Mr. Keating stands upon his desk. He says, "I stand upon my desk to remind myself that we must constantly look at things in a different way. Just when you think you know something, you have to look at it in another way. Even though it may seem silly or wrong, you must try." And so he's telling them to change your perspective. Change your perspective of poetry. Stand upon that desk and look at it in a different way. Or just in general, when you are looking at something, whether it's literary or not literary, you want to change your perspective. Put yourself in someone else's shoes is another cliche, very common cliche, that's like the stand upon your desk, to change your perspective. And I think that that's what we have to do outside of school when we are approaching poetry for ourselves. Understand where we are with poetry when we first approach it, but then stand upon that desk and change your perspective and have an open mind and say, okay, I think poetry is quite difficult to understand and appreciate, but that's okay. I'm going to read it and I'm going to ask myself not only what does the author think, but what do I think? Which is exactly what Mr. Keating wants us to do, because the idea of education is to learn to think for yourself and to let your voice be heard and to sound your barbaric YAWP over the rooftops of the world and to do all those things that Mr. Keating told us. And to not only read poetry, but to let poetry affect us, to let it affect our lives, to let it infiltrate the way we live. Because usually it will have a wonderful, positive, inspiring effect on us. And that's exactly what Dead Poets Society, the film, and Mr. Keating's teaching style has had on me, and has hopefully probably had on you if you've watched the film. If you haven't, then hopefully it will. So those are all of my quotes and tips from Dead Poets Society to hopefully inspire you to read some poetry. I do have my gorgeous deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. I actually got this at the Walt Whitman birthplace because that is near where I live, and I went to the Walt Whitman birthplace in 2018. This is such a special book to me. On the inside we do have the bookmark from the birthplace. It's this beautiful green leather bookmark that I love so much, and that's where I actually got all of my Walt Whitman portraits. I did do my own author portrait, you can see right up there, of Walt Whitman, and Walt Whitman's words have affected me so much, not only because his writing is incredible, but because he is from where I've grown up. He is from Long Island, and he has gone to a lot of the places that I have gone to. There's a poem called From Montauk Point, and Montauk is the very, very end, out east, on the opposite side of Long Island from New York City. It's right after the Hamptons, so it's the beach towns, you have the lighthouse. All the way at the very end of Long Island is Montauk Point. We have the lighthouse and everything, and he went there and wrote a poem there, and I thought that I would read it to you. I stand upon some mighty eagle's beak, eastward the sea absorbing, viewing nothing but sea and sky. The tossing waves, the foam, the ships in the distance, the wild unrest, the snowy, curling caps, that inbound urge and urge of waves seeking the shores forever. Ah, so good, so good. I could read you all of these poems, but I think the last one I want to share with you is one of my favorites, and it is called To a Stranger. Passing stranger, you do not know how longingly I look upon you. You must be he I was seeking, or she I was seeking. It comes to me as of a dream. I have somewhere surely lived a life of joy with you. All is recalled as we flit by each other, fluid, affectionate, chaste, matured. You grew up with me, were a boy with me, or a girl with me. I ate with you and slept with you. Your body has become not yours only, nor left my body mine only. You give me the pleasure of your eyes, face, flesh, as we pass. You take on my beard, breast, hand in return. I am not to speak to you. I am to think of you when I sit alone or wake at night alone. I am to wait. I do not doubt I am to meet you again. I am to see to it that I do not lose you. He's just, the emotion that he puts into all of his words is just, leaves me speechless, and I can't recommend you read some Walt Whitman enough, so if you get any poet out of this video, make it be Uncle Walt. Me and Mr. Keating demand it. So I hope you have enjoyed this video and that it has inspired you to read some poetry or some Shakespeare plays. I would love to know who your favorite poet is, or poets or poetesses, and if you have any advice for other beginners to poetry, please feel free to share that in the comments, because that would be wonderful and I'm sure very, very helpful. So I will see you soon in another video. Happy reading, and don't forget, carpe diem, seize the day, make your lives extraordinary.